That's right. Online. Hope you all guys. Yeah, extremely hot in Pretoria this afternoon. Uh, Earlier on today, I thought we're going to have a little bit of rain. Humidity is certainly sky high, no pun intended. And yeah, we are waiting that. But at this point in time, extremely hot because it's a hot day also in politics. Because yesterday it was scorchingly hot in politics. But since people are going on holiday and they're busy with a whole lot of other things, they didn't keep their eye on the ball. And that ball, of course, was the election process inside the ANC. People, please understand this. This is a process inside the ANC, but it has significant ramifications for us. Why? Because the ANC has been governing South Africa now close on 30 years. And the chances of them not governing us in future is very slim. And I will get to that point a little bit later on. Okay, first off, quite some time ago, I published a video. It's still on my YouTube channel. Please go and scroll there. You will find it there. I will repost it. Maybe I must repost it here also, where I described the ANC as I've come to know them through many years of first-hand experience with ANC members, with ministers, through organized business and their dealings with politics and politicians and ministers, in which I come to the conclusion, and I say it in so many words, the ANC is not a political party. The ANC is just simply an organized crime unit. It's a mafioso. It runs itself on the inside pretty much as organized crime will run itself, La Cosa Nostra type of situation. There's very little difference between what you will find in big crime syndicates vis-a-vis what you will find inside the ANC. That being said, most political parties, unfortunately to my mind, are also run in that same fashion. So yeah. It's not an ANC thing itself or on its own in South Africa. Certainly not. The EFF itself is a junior brother, but a much more efficient brother to the ANC, which is also, to my mind, just simply a criminal organization. They do exactly the same things, only much better hidden and much more efficient, because obviously they're a younger generation and they have been taught a whole lot of lessons by the older generation. They could see from the mistakes of the older generation what not to do and what to do. But let's leave the EFF aside for now. They are not the topic of this video. This video is about the NEC meeting, gathering that we had of the ANC just yesterday, and of course then the elections inside the ANC for new leadership that will take the party then at least until up to the next general elections, where you and I can normally go and vote for somebody. But these elections that I'm speaking about, the NEC elections, are inside, it's internal, it's ANC politics. Okay, why is that important to us? As I said, 30 years ANC has been in power in South Africa. Every year, every crisis, every scandal, we hear that the ANC is now going to be on its last legs. It's shattering, it's falling apart. It will split up, it will not reach its 50% mark at the polls during national elections, etc., etc. All these things, nothing new under the sun. We've been hearing it for the past 30 years, 25 years at least. People, if you were already politically wise at that point in time, you will remember the weapons scandal way back, where literally every politician from the ANC was involved in some way. And that was supposed to then kill off the ANC. Never killed off the ANC, it actually made it stronger. People will still remember the Nkandla crisis, or the Nkandla scandal, where the DA went rampant with the whole issue of a huge amount of money that was spent on the private residence of Jacob Zuma, then the president of South Africa. I think it was something like 250 million rand or something to that tune, which to a politician is small change. But for weeks and weeks and weeks, the only thing that we heard was Nkandla and how the ANC will then split. You are all very familiar with the term state capture. When that scandal broke, once again, everybody was telling us, all the so-called political analysts and experts were telling us the ANC is now at its last, it's going to implode and all this kind of nonsense. Nothing like that ever happened. Why? Because the ANC, as I said, is a criminal organization. It's not a political party. It has nothing to do with politics. It's just simply a mechanism to enable crime and to siphon money. It's as simple as that. And whoever is the most apt in doing that will necessarily become the leader and lead the party and lead the structures and lead the branches. That is the inner nature of the ANC. It becomes a problem for us. Indian, doesn't matter what your background is, in that the ANC dictates power in South Africa. The constitution is set up in such a way that although there's, for instance, chapter 2, the Bill of Rights, right? I was speaking of chapter 2 of the constitution that served us very well very recently during the COVID pandemic. You must also remember that the constitution is set up in a winner-takes-all fashion. What do I mean by that? In Parliament, if a given party has 50% of the seats in Parliament plus one, not 51%, 50% of the vote plus one seat, they have 100% of the power. And why do I say that? Because with a mere 50% plus one vote, most legislation in South Africa can be carried through. So in other words, it doesn't matter what type of situation we are sitting in and what type of legislation is intended. The ANC, given their position that they indeed have 50% plus one of the vote in Parliament, can basically put through legislation of whatever type, and it will pass because they have the majority there. It's not like in Europe where you're sitting with conglomerates of parties and coalitions of parties, and it's always difficult to gauge to which side a vote in Parliament will go. In South Africa, it's a simple thing. If the ANC tables a piece of legislation, it's carried through. Right? It's as simple as that. In Parliament, there's different commissions and committees also doing certain jobs. And because of the fact that most of the MPs, the members of Parliament, are indeed ANC, most of those committees are run by the ANC too. So in other words, even the watchdog organizations inside Parliament is run by the ANC. So with their 50% plus one vote or power in Parliament, they can actually dictate 100% of the power in government today. You must also remember that now let's speak of the levels of government that I'm speaking about here. Remember, Parliament is just legislative. In other words, they make laws. And then you have the executive, the cabinet, the ministers. And those ministers are drawn from the ANC because the ANC is the majority party, full stop. Okay, so in other words, with the power being yielded by the ANC, they run the country 100%. The opposition parties make a lot of noise, they make a lot of fuss, but in real terms, and I've said it many times before, in real political terms, realpolitik, which Bismarck taught us more than 150 years back, they count literally for nothing. And I'm not degrading the political parties of South Africa, I'm just stating a simple fact. The DA, as the strongest opposition party, so-called opposition party, can jump up and down as much as they like. They can even run to court, they can run to the newspapers, they can do whatever they want. If the ANC says the sky is red from now on, then the sky is red, and the DA can't do anything about it. That's a simple facts, it's a simple truth that we are dealing with. Okay, that is the background to what we are speaking about today. Right. What happened also the last couple of months, we were told by every Jan Rap en sy maat, every Tom, Dick and Harry, who think themselves politically informed enough to go on live video and on social media and on stream and on whatever they want to. We were told a lot of nonsense. That nonsense mostly revolved around what was called, or is still called, the RET faction, Radical Economic Transformation faction of the ANC, which is actually led by mostly three persons: Jacob Zuma himself, Ace Magashule, the ex-Secretary General of the ANC. He was also previously the Premier of the Free State Province, and Supra. I will always forget his surname. My apologies. Previously also the Premier of the Northwest Province. Very strong, very loved leaders at some point in the ANC. Very charismatic persons, people. And then also to their side, you had a lot of smaller figures running around and trying to pick off whatever they could out of the whole thing. Mrs. Zuma, Dlamini Zuma, the minister, current minister still, of course, by marriage, she is attached to Zuma, Jacob Zuma himself, and obviously she will also then support the RET faction in whatever they do. So, all the political analysts, of most of them, and all the amateurs going onto social media speaking about these things. And yes, I'm also an amateur, but I'm an amateur not trying to project myself as to be an expert. I'm just simply an observer, and I'm telling you what I observe, and I make my conclusions of what I see, on what I see. And I tend to be right in what I conclude. But everybody was running around with this whole idea of the ANC is now, number one, breaking up, and number two, will be taken over by the Zuma, the RET faction, which was absolute nonsense from word go. As I already explained, the chances of the ANC breaking up terminally is very slim, and if that happens, then we're going to have civil war in South Africa in any event. So we're speaking a whole new scenario then. I still remember the time, maybe you do too, when COPE was formed out of a breakaway group inside the ANC. Patrick Lekota led that breakaway, also himself a very strong leader in the ANC, very charismatic person. They broke away from the ANC, and everybody was going, oh well, now the ANC is going to fold because it's broken up. And what happened? COPE disappeared into nothingness, because Taylor himself was never an enabler strong enough to draw enough people to his party. The EFF is a little bit different. They run their own operations. There's a lot of let's call it business dealings going on through the EFF. So obviously they have a little bit of pull, and that is why they survived, and they are indeed getting stronger by the day. But the ANC wouldn't break up. And the chances of the RET faction ever taking over the ANC again at that point already was very slim, if not a total fantasy and figment of the imagination. Why? Jacob Zuma and these leaders of the RET faction found themselves at some point as the enablers of the crime and the siphoning of money in the ANC. But they were caught out. They were caught out many times by outside forces, which is a very good thing, but they were also caught out internally by their opponents, who were also jockeying for the same positions. And they lost their power to siphon money through the ANC. They lost their power to be a force to bargain on behalf of the ANC, to go to Europe and demand a certain amount of money, and the New World Order just simply opens their pockets and they throw it at the ANC. So they lost their position. We must be very clear on that. So people running around with this idea and this notion that somehow Zuma will return as a very old man to the presidency of the ANC and the presidency. My apologies once again for the total ruckus being made next door. But the chances of the ANC ever to be ruled by Zuma again is zero. It will never happen. Zuma becoming president of the country, the chances of that is zero. It will never happen. Okay. How do you become the president of the country? You must be the president or the leader then at least of the strongest party in parliament, that being the ANC. So if the ANC still holds the power in the parliament, then obviously the leader of the ANC will be voted in as president of the country. We do not have a separate process in South Africa like we have in the United States, where the House of Representatives and the Senate is chosen, their representatives in one election, but then the presidential race runs on its own separately, wholly separately, even in a different year than general elections. We don't have that in South Africa. In South Africa, we have one general election, during which the National Assembly, the members to the National Assembly and the National Chamber of Provinces, that's a Freudian slip, are elected, and from them, inside the parliament, they then elect the president of the country. We don't have a separate presidential run. So Steve can't ever become president of South Africa, and Liebenberg can't ever become president of South Africa, and Zuma can't ever become president of the ANC of South Africa, unless by God's good grace they have a party strong enough to achieve 50% plus one, which is virtually impossible, or secondly they become the president of the ANC. Okay. So, sorry, and I'm not stepping on toes now. I'm once again speaking simple realism. For a very long time, people were running around with this idea that Steve Hofmeyr will now become our president. He will be voted in at the ballot box as the president of the country. The Constitution doesn't even make provision for that. It was fantasy. It would never happen. It could never have happened. And frankly, I feel Steve should have said to people at that point in time, he should have said to them, please, you're running around with a fantasy that can never happen, and rather have handled it in that way. But that's past tense. That's long ago. By now, everybody have come to the conclusion that was absolute nonsense too. That's a little side note to this whole discussion. Okay. At the NEC gathering now, and I spoke to you in a video, I think about a week ago. I said to you, the RET faction, the people of the RET faction are not even nominated from branch level to certain positions. Now, if you're not nominated, then the chances of being chosen or elected is virtually zero. Yes, the Constitution makes a provision for people to be nominated from the floor, simply meaning that during the process there and then a person's name can be thrown into the hat, so to speak. And yes, that is theoretically possible. However, we've seen through many years that the ANC is very formalized in how they do these elections. Why? Because it's rigged. We know elections are rigged, and the ANC are masters at rigging elections. So even if a person is nominated from the floor, the chances of that person being elected into that position is virtually zero. So a week ago, plus minus a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, I spoke to you on the issue, and I said to you, there are the nominees. There are the people that can be elected, who has been vetted by the ANC itself, because there's also a vetting process, to stand for different positions in the executive of the ANC. Okay, and the RET faction does not even feature there. Nobody nominated them. So in other words, they cannot even be elected. And people still ran around with this notion of somehow Zuma is going to march into the meeting there, him and his faction, and just simply take over the show. Right. Which was, again, simple fantasy and simple nonsense that people were being told from different platforms, from mainstream media, from social media. It could never happen, it would never have happened, and it didn't happen. Okay. In the end, and you can go to the list that I presented to you at that point in time, you can go and look at everyone who was indeed elected now. Every one of them appear on the list that I discussed here on video with you in detail, to say this person was elected or nominated for this position, and in the end, one of those people who were indeed elected. So, the president of the ANC is still Ramaphosa, and he won by a significant margin to his second, the only other person running against him, Gwede. I will get back to Gwede in a moment. And then as the vice president, Paul Mashatile, previously also Gauteng Premier, was elected. As expected, as I predicted. Secretary General, I hinted at that point in time, Gwede Mantashe, and I said, Gwede Mantashe is always there when the ANC needs to be rescued from inside. Why? He's the old man of the party. Inside the party, he enjoys extreme power, extreme power. If Gwede Mantashe snaps his fingers, people jump, right? And he was voted in as Secretary General of the party. So those are the top 3 people in the ANC. The lesser positions down, not so important, still important, but not so important. Long and the short is just that the RET Zuma faction has basically been obliterated from the ANC. There's nothing left of them. So the people running around with this story that they must now go and negotiate with the Zulus and negotiate with Zuma because he's going to become the next president again and be friends with the RET faction, and Ramaphosa will be lifted from his position, and all this it was absolute nonsense. It was, to some extent, nonsense to get the money out of your pocket, to come across as to be political analysts and people versed in politics in South Africa, and therefore somehow they could see into the future and they could predict all these strange things that will happen. It was absolute nonsense. It was a ruse. And the people who fell for that, guys, you fell for it hook, line, and sinker, and it was used by at least one person to just simply get the money out of your pocket. Just face it. Just face it. You were bamboozled. Right. Zuma was never coming back. The stories and the pictures and the cows that were brought to him, and I don't know what other stunts were pulled to make people believe that somehow that person that I'm speaking about now has some kind of political clout, and he will be the next right-hand man of Zuma, the new Zuma presidency, etc. It was absolute nonsense. It was simple nonsense to get the money out of your pocket. Full stop. Just deal with a fact. For the political analysts out there, and there's quite a few professors out there who are also running with very similar stories, I don't know where you get your information from. I really do not know. Maybe you sit behind your desk and you thumb suck these things. Maybe you are paid by people to come and speak nonsense. I don't know where you get your information from. If you really have, like some people claim, all these informants from the ANC and all the clout inside the ANC, and you even train some of these people, and therefore they are speaking to you on a first-name basis, etc., etc. Nonsense! Why are they then lying to you? Are you then gullible, meaning that they can tell you anything and everything and you believe it and you make your analysis on that? Because that's the only other option. Or you were simply thumb-sucking the whole thing. So please, people have to deal with reality. Why is that necessary to deal with reality? If we are facing problems in South Africa, like we are doing with Eskom and our economy and the rand tanking and all these things, that's impacting negatively on our population, we must see the problems for what they are. There's no use in fighting paper tigers. There's no use in fighting straw men. We must see the problem for what it is. Because if we don't, we cannot find a solution to the problem. We can run around with all kinds of fantasies and make-believe stories, but it only goes so far. When reality kicks in, reality is usually very simple, and therefore we need to face reality. Not all kinds of theories and not all kinds of narratives. We have to look at simple fact and make our conclusions from those. So there's no use for us to run around with all kinds of nonsensical stories and fantastical stories. In the end, it weakens us. It weakens us to a point where we become so confused as to what we hear and what is being told to us, that we can't see the problem for what it is any longer. I wanted to take you back to the early days of COVID, when everybody was running around about the COVID pandemic, so-called COVID pandemic, and then the whole issue of mandatory vaccination, how good it is, and how Ramaphosa, the great leader Ramaphosa, is now taking us through this crisis, etc., etc. And I was one of a few people who stood up and called nonsense. I called bullshit. I said, guys, just open your eyes. There's no real pandemic running here. There's not thousands of people lying dead in the streets. I remember at some point they had a state tender out for the digging of 10 million graves. 10 million, that's 20% of our population. I called bullshit on it. And I was right. I was right in the end. One example. I'm not praising myself. All that I'm saying is people need to be very careful of what they believe. I remember specifically during the COVID, and when the lockdown, not even the mandatory vaccination, later on the lockdown was announced, that evening on TV, every single leader of every single so-called opposition party was standing there next to Ramaphosa supporting him. Even the Freedom Front, who's supposed to be in parliament for us, came out in a media statement very clearly saying, we support the lockdown because we are now in a pandemic. Really, guys, nearly I cursed. How stupid could you be to go and say something like that? Okay, there's no use pointing fingers at this point in time. The reality that we are sitting with is Ramaphosa is still the president of the ANC. Paul Mashatile is now the deputy president, and Gwede is the secretary general. Between the three men there, I think the ANC will strengthen itself again tremendously. They do that every time before election time. They come with all these very imaginative schemes, and they bamboozle the average voter out there to vote for them. They will once again simply do that. Full stop. There's people saying that Ramaphosa will now still resign. There was already a motion in Parliament, but the majority of Parliament voted in his favor. Why would he resign? Resign for what? The Zuma faction, in a very last desperate attempt, now launched a so-called private prosecution against him. They erred in the most basic thing about private prosecutions. Ramaphosa was never an accused person in the original case that they referred to. They are now charging him as a so-called accessory after the fact. They are running a so-called private prosecution with Ramaphosa to be the accessory after the fact. People, ouens, julle weet nie eers wat het is nie. Julle weet nie eers wat het is nie. Right? There will not be a private prosecution of Ramaphosa, full stop. I can guarantee that to you today. It's once again just simply a ruse. Just simply a last desperate attempt to save face and make a little bit of money. The lawyers being there at the forefront, making a little bit of money out of the thing. So don't even fall for nonsense like that. It will not happen, full stop. Ramaphosa is the president of the ANC. And the chances of him becoming the president of the Republic of South Africa, if something cataclysmic happens, don't happen in the meantime, the chances of him becoming the president of the country again is virtually 100%. In fact, I will put money. I'm not a gambling man, but I will put money on the fact that he will become the next president once again of South Africa. We stuck with Ramaphosa for the next 5 years plus. I also said it in my previous videos. That's the long and short of it. Those are the facts that we are dealing with. I quickly want to speak about Mkhize. Mkhize is a Zulu. He comes from Natal, and at some point in time, he was leaning towards the Zuma faction. But Mkhize himself, he was previously also the secretary, the treasurer general of the ANC, during which time I met him more than once. I was still at that point quite high up in organized business, not organized crime. organized business. We met with him quite a few times. I can't remember how many times. We actually invited him more than once to come and speak to us, to tell us what was going on inside the ANC, for us to get a clearer vision on what the future may hold. Once again, also because of all the stories that the ANC is splitting apart. So I know the man. Very gentlemanly, very soft-spoken. He's not a fighting type. He's not a fighter type. He's very stern in what he does and says. Very much like Gwede Montashi. If Gwede says a thing, it stands. So Mkhize is a very strong leader. Make no mistake about it. But yes, Mkhize was the only one that in the end ended up as another candidate to the presidency of the ANC, and he lost by a considerable margin of about 500 votes that went against him vis-a-vis Ramaphosa, who won. Now, the very next day, Mkhize makes the obvious politically correct and inside the ANC, maybe then economically correct decision of saying, we don't feel betrayed and we don't think there was something strange, and we are now putting our full support behind Ramaphosa himself. Mkhize didn't have much of a choice. If he went the competitive way of taking on Ramaphosa now and saying the whole thing was flawed, etc., he would have found himself in exactly the same position as where Zuma is. Totally in the political wilderness, and the chances of him returning would have been virtually zero in that event. Mkhize played it very clever. He played it very clever to say, I accept how the elections went, and I support Ramaphosa, and hear me out on this. When a new cabinet is formed, and I'm being advised it will be formed within 2 weeks from today, so keep an eye on the news. New cabinet, in other words, the new ministers, because Ramaphosa has the prerogative to appoint his own ministers at any time. I can promise you, I will put money on it, that Mkhize will be back in cabinet. I think there was a lot of deal making done after the elections behind the scenes, and Mkhize said, okay, it's fine, I will support him, I will throw my support behind Ramaphosa in exchange for, at least in a cabinet post. I have no doubt about that. There's also a possibility that he will become the premier of the province, the KwaZulu-Natal province. Maybe that's the deal, although I don't think that's going to be. I see him as once again to be taken into the cabinet. You must also remember there's quite substantive criminal charges against Mkhize. Expect those to be dropped. Expect those to either be put in long-term freeze or just simply being dropped. I think there was simple deal making to get Mkhize to a position where he said, I accept what happened at the election process, but I want my cut of the pie. And Gwede, I suppose, most probably then said, give the man his pie, his cut of the pie, so that we have order in the party and we can move forward from here to go and take the next election once again and rule the country, because that is what we are supposed to do. That is our main job. We need to keep control over South Africa. Okay, people, those are just simply my views. Those are simply my opinions. I'm the first guy to go and raise my hand and say I made a mistake. But I've been there through many of these political turmoils and storms, sometimes seeing from the inside what was going on. One of the top ANC men, he died not so very long ago, was a personal friend of me in terms of once again meeting him during my time in organized business. He was quite an acceptable person, and we actually became friends. And he would many times just simply send me a little WhatsApp and say, Skalk, this is going to happen, maybe you must warn your people. So those things happen. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. I'm not going to mention his name. It's not necessary. But things like that happen. So I've been around the block. I've seen how the ANC operates on the inside. I see how the ANC operates to the outside. How they will always rally. They will always rally. Hulle gaan altyd laar trek. Wees verseker daarvan. And it happened again. And it happened again. What will break up the ANC? I said it in my video where I came to the conclusion they are just simply an organized crime unit when the money stops flowing. That's the only place where the ANC will split apart substantially. I don't say that a certain section won't go and try and create their own formation or party. That can always happen. But the ANC folding inside or folding or scattering from one another will only happen in the event that the money stops flowing. And at this point in time, the money certainly did not stop flowing. In fact, I understand there's a lot of money coming in, especially on the back of so-called green energy, which in its own is why we have the Eskom crisis, because we are already being prepared mentally for the day when certain conglomerates and persons will basically run our energy needs in South Africa. But on the back of that, there's a huge amount of money already being promised and already flowing into South Africa. So as long as the money flows, the ANC will be there. As to Ramaphosa will most probably be the president again come the next general elections. Paul Mashatile most probably will be the deputy president, and Gwede, the old man, will basically run the ANC on the inside as secretary general. Very, very powerful position inside the party. He will be there. I don't see him per se in the cabinet, but he will most probably run from Lutule House. He will run the ANC from there, as he has done so very successfully for a very long time, and very long stints at the time. And that, folks, is where I end. I leave it to you. You can take my views on this. You can discuss it, or you can just simply disregard it. It's up to you. Or you can come and speak to me again in a couple of months' time and say, Scott, you were right. As usual, you were right. And once again, I'm not praising myself. I'm just simply taking simple facts, simple statistics, and I'm basing my opinions on those. I cut out the bullshit. And when you cut out the bullshit and you get to the bone, you get to what really is going on, it actually becomes very easy to predict what will happen and what will not happen. Okay. So have a nice evening, and it was so nice speaking to you again. This video will be available on YouTube also, and I'm going to put it up on my Telegram also as a in YouTube format. It's just simply too big to put up there in its totality. So yeah, thank you so much for listening once again, and yes, I will see you when I see you. Salutes.